Welcome everyone to Stats and Scheme with Tage and Shawn. I'm your co-host today, Tage Seth, here with Shawn Syed, fresh off another great week of football. I say that every week, but it was truly a really good week of football. Shawn, what do you want to talk about first today?
Well, Tish, first, every week is a great week of football. You're right. I know we'll complain about whatever Thursday night games. We're going to be missing those in April. But yeah, in week 9, the day starts at 9 a.m. It ends at midnight, going through all those 4 time slots. How did you make it through? Were you like snacking on your Reese's during that time, or what was your way to get through it all?
Yeah, I went to a show Friday night, Indian American Student Association, that our friend Arjun Menon performed at. And then I also went to a comedy show Saturday night. Sunday morning was a little bit tough for me. I was texting you during the game as I was getting through that. But luckily, the ending was really exciting. And then, yeah, after that, it was quick power nap and then back into football. And, CJ Stroud and a couple other players we're going to talk about today kept it really exciting. But yeah, I want to hear how you got through it.
Look, I had no problems. I was lucky. I slept early. I didn't have as popular of a weekend as you, Tage. Sounds like a lot. But yeah, Tage, it was a great week. And let's go to Baltimore first and talk some defense. Mike McDonald has the Ravens defense playing at such a high level, and they're doing a great job of marrying their personnel with a really sound scheme. They're getting impact plays from Jadeveon Clowney slashing off the edge. Kyle Hamilton has the versatility to play multiple roles in the secondary, but can also be a difference in the run game. They do a good job understanding things like the offense's cadence and timing up blitzes really, really well. But then they also have the speed to close in space and prevent yards after the catch. They had a really nice setup on a 3rd and 11 where they get into a 3-high safety look with a load front. They drop a mugged up linebacker out into coverage while the other linebacker became part of a stunt. And then Justin Madubuike comes around and ends up getting a sack. Then later on, they show 7 players on the line. They give that blitz look before dropping out, only rushing 4, being sound in coverage, and coming away with an interception. Then when they do rush 4, they're able to get home, and Kyle Van Noy even had a game-changing type of play. Altogether, the Ravens defense is fun to watch every week because they play really well together. They have the tools to deal with what the offense presents, and then they can also dictate terms to teams when they get into some of those more aggressive looks. So, Tage, that's what I think about the Ravens. I love watching them on a week-to-week basis. How are you feeling about them? What are the stats showing on those guys?
Yeah, I totally agree with you on your point about marrying personnel to scheme. When you look at the Ravens defense, they've invested in some areas of this defense. You think about the trade and contract they gave to Roquan Smith, the high draft capital they spent on someone like Kyle Hamilton, but it's really these secondary players that they have that are stepping up. You mentioned Kyle Van Noy, 6 sacks for Kyle Van Noy on the season so far. Like, that's really good scheme, and it's really good of the Ravens to show that they can have their superstars and then have these other secondary players revolve around that. You think about the way that Patrick Queen is playing this year, where because of Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen's job has become a little bit easier and he's been able to take advantage of that opportunity. And then you have players like Geno Stone, who I believe has gotten an interception in 5 straight games at this point. And then Justin Madubuike, who is at 7.5 sacks on the year. Has been playing really well from the positions that he's been put in. And it's continually this Ravens defense has had a theme of investing in their secondary, investing in their back 7, and finding pass rush from different areas, from scheme, from having a really good secondary and creating coverage sacks. And that's what they're doing again this year. And when you have someone like Mike McDonald, who I believe is the best defensive play caller in the league right now, that's not a head coach, he can really just take advantage of all these opportunities. And when you have an offense that was playing well and a coordinator that was scheming well and Shane Waldron come into Baltimore, and you hold them to a 2nd percentile EPA per play, a 1st percentile success rate, that's another very impressive performance from this Ravens defense.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Shane Waldron because, Mike McDonald goes up against Waldron and then Ben Johnson with the Lions. And I mean, the Ravens totally took it to him on both sides of the ball. We're not going to talk about the Ravens offense at length, but when their offense is rolling, that combined with the defense is just such a good combination. And I think up front, they earn the right to rush the passer by really just killing the run on a lot of those early downs. And I mean, the Roquan Smith thing, it's so great to see how, like, when you elevate in one position, you can put more on that player's plate, and then that allows your other linebacker to play a certain way. I actually think when we talk about the Dolphins, that's another example when, the more you put on one player, it allows another player to play a little bit differently or just be more aggressive in general and get them out of some of those tough situations. So you can see Roquan Smith dropping across the field. And, not every team can do that because not every team has Roquan Smith. And I just, if you get into 3rd and long against the Ravens, that is a really, really tough situation. I think Mike Macdonald has a really deep 3rd down bag. I talked about that kind of 3-high look, faking pressure, making it feel like there's pressure. You have to respect that ability is going to be there. And yeah, I really think of coaches that are able to get a lot of whatever pieces they have. And to me, Macdonald is doing a great job with the Baltimore defense. Because, are you expecting Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy to have these kind of pressure numbers at this point in their career? Probably not, but it just seems like the Ravens are finding ways to be able to do that.
Right, exactly. And when we look at like new innovations like the Amazon expected blitz model that they've been using on Prime Vision this year, or like the Big Data Bowl last year where there were similar entries on expected pass rush and different stuff like that, like Mike Macdonald actually breaks a lot of those models because of that 3rd down blitz package that you mentioned, where he'll line up 5, 6, 7 guys on the line of scrimmage, around the line of scrimmage. You don't know who's rushing, who's not rushing, because you are having these performances where, like you brought up, like Kyle Hamilton and Jadeveon Clowney and different players like that are getting sacks and getting pressures, at a pretty high rate. Even someone like Michael Pierce, who you wouldn't expect, or Broderick Washington, like they're able to get some pressures themselves as well. And Seahawks, again, like pretty good offense coming into this game, only converted on late downs 7.7% of the time in this game. They were on 3rd and long a lot, and then they basically had no chance when they were in those situations with their current offensive line. That was a 0th percentile output on the season so far. So if you can't convert on early downs against the Ravens, that's a big problem for you. And that was an issue for the Lions, where they weren't able to get much going on early downs. And then late downs is really where Mike Macdonald's defense takes over. And the Ravens still, like, even on early downs, they've been better on late downs, obviously, but like they've also given up the least amount of explosive plays, which are 15+ yard gains in the league. Only 39 explosive plays this season, which is only 6% of plays. They have the best rate of drives that don't allow opponents to reach the +40, which, like you mentioned, like that synergy between their offense and defense, like that makes it easier for the offense if the opposing offenses are having a tough time of reaching the 40. And then I brought this up a couple weeks ago, and it's still held true to this week, where they allow the 2nd lowest completion percentage in the NFL. But even if they do allow a completion, they allow the 3rd lowest YAC EPA per catch. So it's just a great combination of not allowing many completions, but even if they do allow completions, the tackling ability and the scheme puts these players in a great spot. And that's so much fun to watch right now.
I like that yak point because it's sometimes hard for, I don't know. I guess the Big Data Bowl this year is doing a lot around tackling, but when you're watching it, you can feel it. Like, this team is a really, really good tackling team. And that's kind of like an amorphous description. Like, a lot of teams are really good at tackling, obviously, but it is a testament. I agree that they're put in positions where they're able to make those tackles over and over. And of course, it comes down to the players individually. I do think that defenses as a whole are, at this point in like the long history of football, they're really created to prevent explosive plays. So you can't have those missed tackles that lead to explosives. You obviously want to put a roof over the defense in terms of your coverage, right? There's less teams playing crazy aggressive defense snap after snap because they want to make the offense, slowly get the ball downfield. How many times are you going to patiently take that check down over and over? And defenses are really betting you're going to make a mistake before we do, right? Whether it's a 1st down run that only goes for -1, and now you're in 2nd 11, you throw an incomplete pass, we're 3rd and 11. Now Mike Macdonald can really dig into his bag. So it's interesting to see just really what kind of innovations go across the league on defense, where sometimes it feels like offenses are almost kind of tricking themselves into playing a certain way. But let's get along to the Chiefs and Dolphins, because you know how much I love Vic Fangio. So we'll get to talking about him in a little bit, but let's go Chiefs defense first. To me, the Chiefs defense put up another really good performance against the Dolphins in Germany. I just think Spags, he just manipulates pass protection so well. So they have Chris Jones, of course, who is a top end interior defensive tackle. They know that offenses generally want to slide the center towards him because, Chris Jones one-on-one with a guard is going to be a mismatch pretty much every time. So they can take that information. Then they had a great snap where they use like a linebacker away from Jones, kind of draw that running back up, and then they send the nickel free off the edge. So it shows how valuable a dominant defensive lineman can be, But then you pair it with a coach like that, and you just start to see more and more of those results. So the Chiefs did a good job against some of those edge runs early in their game. Like the defensive backs, I don't know whatever was said in the locker room, whatever they've been working on, just so willing to tackle on the edge against the Dolphins offense, who we both love so much, especially when they can get those exterior runs and just fighting for space constantly. I think in the past game, they played kind of low and underneath routes. And then even though, some of those runs did break out towards the end, if you get that fumble 6 from a defense that they're hunting turnovers, that's really enough for your team to win, even when your offense isn't rolling. So how'd you feel about the Chiefs and Tej? I feel like if you're a defense that is lateraling the ball, that's like an asterisk. That's a sign that you're automatically a good defense. That's, I think, the analysis of the day. If you're lateraling the ball to score on a turnover, that's just like, hey, we got to respect you no matter what.
No, I totally agree. I actually wanted to talk about that lateral. So Tom Bliss at the NFL posted a really cool stat, which is like laterals per 1,000 opportunities by play type. So when a rush happens, like a normal handoff on offense, there's only 0.1 per 1,000 times like a lateral ends up happening. Pass reception is 0.88, and punt return is 0.16. So those are kind of like the areas that you see laterals very rarely on. Interceptions go all the way up to 3.8 per 1,000 opportunities on laterals. And Richard Thaler, you brought up a really interesting point when he was asking like our own Eric Eager and a couple other people on Twitter, like why this was happening. And I really think it's the loss aversion. You're playing with house money by the time you get that lateral. You've already caused the turnover. Like, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if the lateral ends up going out of bounds or different stuff like that. So I really like the defense just taking the opportunity to lateral it for that touchdown. And that did end up being the difference in this game. Both offenses scored 14 points each. Chiefs defense ended up scoring 7 points for their own team and ended up winning because of 7. So that's definitely really cool to see. And I mean, you're totally right about the tackling from the Chiefs. Like, tackling again is something that we don't have great stats to measure, and it's more of something that's an eye test situation right now. But the Chiefs being able to tackle has been awesome, but you can really see that in their sack rate. They have the second highest sack rate by a team in the NFL right now, behind the Browns. And again, like, it goes back to getting pass rush from your secondary pass rushers that aren't your superstars. Chris Jones does have 5.5 sacks. He's an awesome player rushing from inside. But when you have George Karlaftis and Michael Dana having 6 and 5.5 sacks respectively, you're also getting Drew Tranquil and Leo Chanel getting sacks in there. And then sometimes you're having those Spags defensive back pressures like Justin Reed and Mike Edwards, who've each contributed to a sack this year. Like, that's just really fun for the Chiefs, is to be able to get these sacks. And this is why they are the third best defense against the pass this season using EPA per pass. And they rank 5th overall and 7th in success rate. Like, even though the Dolphins did have that turnover that killed their EPA, their success rate also wasn't super high in this game. They had a 36th percentile success rate. So Chiefs defense on a play-to-play basis was only allowing them 5 yards per play, which was a very impressive performance against this Dolphins offense.
Yeah, and Drew Tranquil gets to notch another win against the Miami Dolphins. He was with the Chargers last year during that game where it kind of like broke all of our brains, and we're like, oh no, like what did the Chargers do to stop the Dolphins? So Drew Tranquil, maybe he's the secret sauce, but I really do miss Nick Bolton. I think he played so well with them last year. I think he's coming off a fractured wrist, so it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully he gets back healthy. I'm sure he'll be able to get back into the rotation well in time. And then, all right, let's talk about the other end, because I thought this was a pretty good game for Vic Fangio. And like, I just always want to talk about Fangio. So it was really nice that Jalen Ramsey is back with them. It gives them a lot of versatility on the back end. They only let up 14 points on defense. They had a lot of different looks for the Chiefs. The Chiefs, they had a great opening drive. Of course, they start with the play where they kind of have a double move and leak at the same time. And then they end up scoring on a screen to a look that the Dolphins love to run, this cover zero pressure, where they send both interior linebackers right when a team gets in the red zone, especially against empty. So it was a nice job by the Chiefs. But outside of that, they had a lot of ways to deal with Travis Kelce, whether it was kind of like a hard double team between a linebacker and the safety to the opposite side, or playing cover 2 to his side when he was on the outside. Then they had some of their dime looks where it's, instead of like your regular kind of 4 down 2 linebacker, it's 4 down and one linebacker. So it's like your second linebacker is becoming a defensive back type player. And then that player did a good job kind of carrying Kelsey's route into that space. So overall, I mean, I was really happy with kind of what Vic Fangio put on tape. That this game and then the game against the Eagles were actually games where I thought the defense, played well enough to win. So kind of unfortunate that I'm sure they'll get things hammered out on the offensive side where they had a lot of penalties there. But how'd you feel about the matchup from the Chiefs offense versus the Dolphins defense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the Ramsey being back thing is huge. Like, I think that he's that force multiplier type player that allows Fangio to do so much of what he planned over the summer for this Dolphins defense to be like, and that we didn't see these first couple of weeks, but now we're starting to see with his return. I think that the two best pass catchers on the Chiefs are Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice. The stats back that up, and I think the eye test has backed that up, obviously with Kelce, but also with Rice so far. When you hold Travis Kelce to 4 targets, 3 receptions, 14 yards, and you hold Rice to 2 targets, 2 receptions, 17 yards, he did have the touchdown, but you are doing something right on defense. And I think that when you're forcing the Chiefs to target Noah Gray 3 times and Sky Moore 3 times, like, they're fine players, but that's exactly who you want them to target when you're in these situations. And you saw that first drive from the Chiefs with the scripted plays where they had 6 different targets to 6 different receivers, 5 completions to 5 different receivers. And it looked like the Chiefs offense of old. But then you put them in this situation where they're not able to target their best pass catchers, and that really gets muddy for them. And Chiefs have had a lot of trouble running the ball this year. I think Pacheco is a good running back, but the blocking or other circumstances hasn't been there, and that's why their EPA per rush has been pretty low. And then obviously they've had a ton of trouble with short yardage situations. I understand why they don't want to do the quarterback sneak with Mahomes because of the injury that it happened to him a couple of years ago. But I would like to see the solution where you have a light box, you run the ball with Pacheco, or you do different situations, like you put Noah Gray under center like they were doing a little bit, or you just make things a little bit easier on those short yardage situations, because that is the biggest problem for the Chiefs offense right now, is that short yardage. And like I'm looking forward to seeing Andy Reid spend this bye week to clean that up. And I can totally see a scenario like we do every year with the Chiefs where they come out and they have all these really innovative solutions for their problems. And that's one of them right now. But right now, I think that's been an issue for them that I definitely could see getting cleaned up eventually.
Tage, look at you advocating for establishing the run. That is what we're talking about. Tage Seth, big Rashee Rice guy for sure, and establishing the run. Yeah, you obviously heard it here first. I do think that the running game was interesting because I actually do think the Dolphins did a lot on their side where they'll get into they'll play that base 3-4 look, but then they'll send a linebacker fast. And then David Long Jr., he can play as that kind of sole linebacker where he's just feeling out the run. And then like you hear on the broadcast, Mahomes is like 5 down, watch the run through, because that's exactly what the Dolphins do. They mess with your double teams. They can make it so that, hey, now my center and guard have to be in one-on-one situations. You have to react really, really quickly right after the snap and get that linebacker there. And then again, I mean, David Long, he's just playing at a really, really high level. He's able to track the back. He's able to work through traffic. And again, I mean, talk about the Eagles game again, just thinking about he did such a good job there. And it was nice to see them kind of, again, against a really good offense, be able to just succeed in that way. So I do think, the Chiefs running game, really going to have to figure it out in whatever different way. I do think that the Dolphins also just would sent Jalen Ramsey off the edge once or twice. I think it was only one time on a rundown and it didn't have an impact. But when teams get into those kind of condensed sets, I like when defenses are able to attack. I think we've seen that just more across the league where if you're going to tighten things up, it's a shorter path for our cornerback. Let's go ahead and get that. And then just, never missing a chance to talk good about Fangio. Like last year, so they would play, well, not him, but teams in general, the Chargers would do this a lot where when an offense had 3 receivers to a side, the Chargers would play cover 2 to that side and then have their safety to the weak side rob across. Against the Chiefs, the Dolphins did that more with cover 4. So it just feels like a little more sound. It's not saying, okay, well, this is what every other team is doing. This is what Fangio did a lot of in the past too, but using that from a more cover 4 look. And part of that is, I think, because Ramsey gives you a lot of flexibility. And we forget, right, when you lose a starting cornerback, what do you do at the nickel spot? Does your nickel go to outside corner? Does that bump you down to cornerback number 3? Now they get to bump. I think it was Kohu who was playing outside. I think they want to have him in the nickel which is a good thing. And then we see those just like kind of traditional pressure paths. They'll only send 4 people, but it feels like a pressure because a linebacker's coming. A linebacker ends up on a running back. And something you see in these defenses a lot when they stay in base, because a lot of teams just like now staying in base to the Chiefs, especially when they're in those kind of 3 tight end looks. Your edge defenders end up getting out in space. There was a few pass interferences or holdings or whatever illegal contacts where that edge player is not used to playing in coverage, but you still want to kind of keep within the whole feel of your kind of defense. So you want to play that edge defender out there, but it doesn't always look great, unfortunately. So we talked about the Chiefs, talk about the Ravens. Tej, if you had to pick today, like, what do you, we're kind of robbed that we don't get this matchup in the regular season, but where do you kind of lean on a Chiefs Ravens? Which team are you feeling a little bit more of right now?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Like asking a parent to choose between, their favorite child or something. But if the game was played like this Sunday, I would lean Ravens. I'm more bullish on the Chiefs for the future. I guess this is kind of a cop out, but like I think the Ravens are the best team in the NFL right now. I don't know if because of injuries or scheme related stuff, it'll be able to hold up. But I like the Chiefs for the future, but I'm very excited about what the Ravens have going on right now. How about you? What do you see on this
yeah, week? I mean, I'm glad you took the cop out because I feel really similarly. Like, let's just get everyone to the postseason. Let's let everyone be healthy and kind of see what happens, because I do think that we said it previously, right? The Chiefs want to figure out what their receiver situation is by the end of the season. And they kind of are a little bit slowly but surely. I do think, the Chiefs offensive line, it may just be that the Dolphins have had a really good front. I do think McDonald would have a lot of fun drawing. That would be like the ultimate like simulated pressure game between McDonald and Spags, just really going after it. So we'll leave that one. Hopefully we do get that one in the future. Let's get on to Bengals and Bills. Tej, I'm gonna let you lead off on this one. You could choose a side. I don't know which, but maybe go Bengals offense, maybe go Bengals defense. How are you feeling about that Bengals Bills game? That I think it ended up right. It was just a 6-point game at the end, but for a lot of the game, I think we were going back and forth, and it didn't feel as close as maybe the score looked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the Bengals again, like going back to their offense, especially their pass offense. Like I just love how Zach Taylor is just putting the whole thing on that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T Higgins group, and just letting them air it out. Really, like when you think about the way that they had the passing game work early in Burrow's career because of how bad their offensive line is, because of where the trust was between Burrow and his receivers, especially pre-Jamar Chase, but even early in Jamar Chase's career, like Bengals were a negative pass rate over expected team for a lot of those years. Now they're the pass happiest team in the league. Again, they had a plus 18.2% pass rate over expected in this game. That means if you take an average team and you put them in the exact same situations as the Bengals, they would have passed 18% of the time, less of the time. So like over, 60 plays in the entire game, like that's like 10 or 11 more runs that the average team would have had over the Bengals. And the Bengals can do this because Joe Burrow had 14 total EPA in this game, a 79th percentile EPA per pass. T Higgins, even though, I think a lot of fantasy football managers are still waiting for his positive touchdown regression, like we saw from Deontay Johnson or Chris Olave this weekend. Like T Higgins has had a great game, 9.1 total EPA when targeted. Obviously, Jamar Chase was making an impact as well. And like the Bengals have accepted, like they're an okay running the ball team. They're an elite passing team when everyone's healthy, and they're going to fully lean into that. And even when they line up in shotgun, they have the second highest rate of shotgun in the league. Defenses know that coming in, and there's really not much you can do to stop that right now, just because they have so many options. Even some of the non-elite receivers that they have, like Tyler Boyd, and the tight ends are able to step up in these games as well. And they really just took advantage of this Bills defense here.
Look, if you had Joe Burrow and those receivers, you would also probably have a really high pass rate over expected. I think that is a smart way to build that offense because, the offense goes as Joe Burrow goes. I just think they're so frustrating if you were playing against them just because of the way that they find to convert those third downs between Joe Burrow really just having a special ability in the pocket, extending plays. And I think it's kind of underrated. Like he'll have a defender draped on his back and he'll still be able to kind of balance and get out of that. And the receivers just do such a good job. Right? If you're playing zone on defense, Burrow can pick you apart. If you're playing man, brave, that's always tough, I think, against these Bengals receivers, but they do a great job just in their route running, specifically understanding okay, I have an inside leverage defender, but I still need to threaten him inside before I break outside. I think sometimes you'll see receivers kind of not get over eager, but they'll break it off a little bit quicker, or they'll run away from that leverage quicker, where the Bengals receivers, they're setting it up and they're layering those routes in ways that it's like, yeah, if you have three receivers who are that good, it's really great. And then we've talked about how much they use Chase in the backfield. They had a really good design. I think it was Boyd in the backfield to the short side of the field, where they kind of like fake a pick wheel where it looks like Boyd's going on a wheel, but then he kind of breaks back out into space. I don't remember what down it was, but I think that's something I'm sure they'll come back to, where they'll just run Boyd on that wheel, where now on tape, people are looking at it and saying, oh yeah, he's going to run an out route there. But that was just like a really threatening situation where I thought if he kept going, it was great, but maybe something they're kind of setting up down the line. And I mean, Cincinnati's more than happy to just throw bubbles over and over. And then I think they hit 2 bubble and goes, where usually when you fake a screen and get that vertical route, we see teams, it's like a home run where you're getting like 40-yard throws. But Burrow is smart when he sees a safety coming over the top, kind of not underthrow it, but get a back shoulder throw. So it's a 15-yard chunk, a 20-yard chunk. I actually think overall Joe Mixon is playing kind of pretty well. So I wonder, how much, like, do they get into more under center stuff? Do you have to get into more under center stuff? But Tej, I know you had a note on ours that the Bengals kind of interesting modeling question. So I know I didn't see any other notes there. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to look at the Bengals and like what they've done 3 seasons in a row now, where they get off to the slow start and then they just really turn it on around this time of year. I mean, these 3 straight wins against the Seahawks, 49ers, and Bills are like some pretty impressive teams to beat. All top 12 teams and Sumer's like ELO team rating model, different stuff like that. So I think like if they get off to another slow start next year, like I think it becomes an interesting modeling question of like, how much do you want to put weight in their first 4 weeks of every season? Because it doesn't seem like they put much weight in their first 4 weeks of every season, and injuries and different stuff like that have affected that. But like, I think back to the Patriots defenses when they were elite, and like Belichick often used those first 4 weeks to experiment, to try different things, to find out which players should be playing which roles. And you would see the Patriots start 2-2, and on First Take, the headline is "The Patriots Dynasty Over" would be shown, and then the Patriots would win 10 straight, or different stuff like that. And like the Bengals are not the Patriots dynasty, but they're getting to that similar type of vibe where they are able to just really just flip the switch when everyone's healthy, when they have a good feel of who they can trust on their team. And I think that's something that is going to be interesting to model with in the future. Like when you look at the Bengals season-long metrics right now, they rank 15th in EPA per play on offense. They rank 15th in EPA per pass. But if you were to just ordinarily rank them right now, I think you would put them top 5 on offense, top 5 passing offense. And like that early season performance is really just weighing down where they're at right now.
Yeah, that is interesting because now we don't have many teams playing anyone in the preseason. So it feels like sometimes almost like the first 4 weeks of the season are kind of preseason games. Yeah, exactly. The Bengals are a good point, because if you think about them in week 1, like it is such a different team, obviously because of Joe Burrow's calf, but then also there's so many teams across the league where they're not just injury, but the way that they develop, or the way that their kind of offense takes a turn, or maybe a defensive player emerges. So I don't know. I think about, well, what is like the proper time span to cut things up? Because football is already such a small sample size sport. But like, do we want to talk about, okay, just the last 4 games? That's why it's so interesting in the playoffs, where obviously it's just, hey, you want to get into the dance because you can just get a good matchup and kind of get hot and have a good run. But for me, like I don't love projecting matchups and doing previews because it's so hard. Like I love the kind of the post analysis, because you're getting to see, well, this is exactly how they performed for that week, right? Like this week's performance, does it say a lot about past week's performance? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But do you have like a time frame in mind where if we could just like, should we cut the season into 4 game increments? Should it be 5, or is that getting like kind of too small of a sample size at that point?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I really like how you laid all that out there. Like I think it's really interesting to look at like a 4 game rolling window versus season long, and like both of that information is useful. And like it kind of boils down to, do you know what to do with that information when you're looking at it? Like we know that the larger a sample size is, usually can feel more confident about your predictions because of that. And that's often why like a lot of these different stats don't stabilize until around this point in the season. And you can feel confident about that. But like when you look at a team like the Bills, who are kind of going in the opposite direction of the Bengals here, like you look at their season long stats and they all show up really high, especially on defense, because of when their defense was healthy in the first 4 weeks. They're second in point differential on the season. But in the last 4 weeks, when they had half their defense get injured, their defensive metrics have dropped off dramatically. Their point differential is -5 in that time span because of all these defensive injuries. And like that's very useful to know as well. So it's like the push and pull between kind of those two windows of season long and last 4 games, I think is like something that you should use both of. And they're both valuable, but it's really tough at this point in the season to like be dead set on using one of them.
Yeah, the Bills offense point is really interesting. And sometimes like, cause you send me a lot of the stats, you do such a great job with the graphs that we put out on our main account. And sometimes I look at them and I'm like, well, no one's going to catch up to this player because in the first 4 weeks of the season, they like accumulated so much EPA. Like they're just going to kind of sit on top of the graph for a really long time. So maybe, maybe we'll cut some of those up week to week, but on the Bills offense, it can kind of be frustrating sometimes because they have 40-point potential in them every single game. They were really hot on that first drive. Steph Diggs is, of course, just great after the catch. They used Khalil Shakir, I think, on a few different plays where it felt like they're kind of designing routes for him. So I did like that. But the Bengals defense, Lou Anarumo, they do a great job they live that kind of mantra we were talking about a little bit earlier. Limit your explosive plays, make you take snap after snap, right decision over and over. And that bet paid off because you had that play where Josh Allen throws that interception where if you like kind of go through it really slowly, like when Allen kind of like loads his arm up, it's not the worst decision ever, but the cornerback does a really good job carrying that vertical. The Bills even have a route that is really meant to kind of take the cornerback's eyes. And especially if they're playing whatever, if it's cover 2, if it's palms, like that trapping corner usually just traps that route, but it was a really good job by that cornerback. And then you have that play later on where it's a fumble where the tight end actually like ran a great choice route, but unfortunate to kind of flip over and have that just like weird happenstance. And the defender does a good job punching it out. So Bengals defense, like they're fun to watch because they'll limit your explosives. And the Bills, obviously, once you get those explosives so they can get you to slip up, that's a problem. How are you feeling about the Bengals defense? Maybe a little bit on the Bills offense overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Bills offense, I agree with you. It goes back to, what we were kind of saying earlier, where like when you watch them, it feels kind of chaotic and like doesn't always have a huge output when the game is over, but like their underlying metrics always show up pretty well. And like that was again like a pretty similar story in this game where they had a 94th percentile success rate, 60th percentile EPA per play. Obviously the fumble was doing a lot of work there, but they weren't that explosive. They only had a 7% explosive play rate. You would have liked them to see more explosive. And like they've moved further away from 12 personnel. They were really trying that at the beginning of the season with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. They weren't able to run out of 12 personnel at all because of Dalton Kincaid's blocking development curve here. And so now they're into 11 personnel, which they're the third best team in the league out of 11 personnel. They can pass out of 11 personnel well. They can run out of it really well, and they pass higher than league average out of 11 personnel anyways. But again, yeah, it's the Lou Anarumo game from the Bengals defense, like really shutting down the Bills offense after that first drive, kind of making sure that Josh Allen wasn't able to do a lot of the things that he was able to do on that first drive. You had the Stephon Diggs huge yards after catch play that didn't really happen the rest of the game. And like, I think again, like this is another unit where their season-long metrics don't show up super high, but like their last 4 games, they've been playing really well. You go back to the Seahawks game with all the red zone situations that they did really well on, the 49ers game where they were able to create negative plays at the right moments, baiting Brock Purdy into a couple interceptions and fumbles. And then this game again, where it's the same thing where they're just really good at creating negative plays when they need to. And because of the start that they've had where all these games have kind of felt like playoff games to save their playoff chances, like I think that's what's been really big for them is you've gotten these very specific game plans from Big Lou, and it's paid off in a big time.
Yeah, and they did a good job defending the kind of handoff reverse flea flicker that we've seen San Francisco use for a touchdown. We saw Detroit use it for a touchdown. So just little things like the fundamentals of players understanding different shot plays is really cool. I think they use a lot of TE stunts where your defensive tackle is kind of going first, and then your defensive end is sometimes wrapping right inside of that. And it causes some problems for the offensive line. It can make the guard's job harder because they have to deal with someone kind of coming at them really fast and they feel the end kind of flashing right inside. I think Trey Hendrickson is playing at a high level. We've talked about him more than once on the show now because he's just doing a really, really good job. And a lot of teams will use those TE stunts to kind of stir the pocket a little bit. The Dolphins used it a little bit against Mahomes because if you're kind of crashing the pocket in one specific way, you can kind of like know, okay, if we crash inside, we know the quarterback's going to bail outside to the right or to the left, and then you have someone wrapping around right there. So it's just a good way to kind of understand, all right, well, this quarterback likes to move around. They do a great job breaking the pocket. If we can force them to break a pocket, or we're kind of like leading them to that spot where we have a defender closing it in, that's just another nice thing that I think is cool to see for the Bengals, who are just overall just like such a well-coached unit. And it just pops off tape where now I'm still got, like we've talked about, the Bengals defense, the Chiefs defense, the Dolphins defense. We let off with the Ravens defense. Also just 4 units that all of them have nickel defenders who are, I just think, really versatile. They're willing to make tackles. They can get into pass coverage. It almost feels like as a nickel in the NFL now, you can't play that position if you don't want to tackle because you're so often getting forced into the box. Offenses understand, hey, if you're playing 4-2, we're gonna force your 7th defender in. If it's not a safety, it's going to be the nickel. If they can't tackle, that's going to be a problem for you. I don't know. Maybe it's that just more people are playing defensive back in college because of whatever 7-on-7s, the usual things that people say about why so many teams pass the ball. But it feels like across the league, so many good interior defensive linemen. That's like a huge pop that we've seen. And to me, just a lot of nickel defenders who are just really, really good over and over for sure.
Definitely. And yeah, Eric Eager and I had a pretty long discussion about like, why is the reason why defenses are playing so much better than offenses this year, especially compared to the past couple of years. And I think it really goes back to what you just mentioned with that 7th box defender. If you're able to stop the run with a light box, if you have 5 box defenders, or you have 6 box defenders, depending on the situation, you are already in an advantage as a defense because you're able to play a light box to give you an advantage in the passing game. And then you can still stop the run, which is usually the trade-off that defenses have to make. And the data does back that up this year. When you look at box numbers charted by FTN data or other companies, defenses have just gotten better at stopping the run with lighter boxes. With 5 or 6 box defenders, they are allowing lower success rate, lower EPA per rush, depending on that. And that's what it boils down to, is you can play lighter boxes at a higher rate and get better at stopping the run with those lighter boxes. The combination of those two is why offensive production has been down this year. And that's why it's been cool to see what defensive coordinators' answers have been to these really explosive, high-flying offenses of the past couple of years.
Yeah, and now I'm thinking, okay, well, how do you counter that on the offensive side? And for the Bills, it's like you do have to lean into the Josh Allen chaos factor because I'm not sure how much are you able to get some of those just crazy top end performances if you try and get him to like whatever it means to be like, hey, like play more conservative. I do think there are, of course, times where he needs to maybe take underneath throws, but I don't know how many of those like bomb over the top throws you're going to be able to get if you try and hammer into him like a different style of playing. And the light boxing, we've talked about it, me and you, a bunch, just because sometimes it's hard. It's like, okay, well, this is a pre-snap light box, but post-snap, we know a safety is rotating into it. It does sometimes mess with how the offensive line, especially in outside zone systems, if they use like a counting system, sometimes that can create problems. But when we talk about interior defensive linemen doing such a good job, a lot of defensive coordinators, I think, they're just like flat better across the league. I think position coaches are also doing a really good job of those linebackers, like in that specific run look where it's a lighter box. Linebackers usually kind of have to like stack over a defensive lineman. And it's just like more of a feel thing as opposed to let me run as fast as I can through a gap from the linebacker level. And that's not easy. Like, it is not easy to do that at full speed. We talk about David Long for a reason in this week where he was able to do that just at a really high level. So I think that overall, just, people on defense are getting better. And I think offenses where I thought this year offenses would be ahead. More than happy to be wrong, where defenses feel like they're ahead right now. But hey, still a lot of season left to go. And we had that great Eagles Cowboys matchup. We get another one later in the season. We're really lucky to have that. We'll start with Eagles offense first. They usually have such an advantage on the offensive line in this game. So they're on their third right guard right now. And the Cowboys really understood how to attack that by placing Michael Parsons, who's one of the best defenders in the league, over that guard. They would get into 5 down fronts to draw one-on-ones because the Eagles, of course, wanted to slide Kelsey, who's their center, over to that side with their right guard. And the Cowboys were content to play man coverage. They didn't over-rotate to A.J. Brown. I think that Jalen Hurts has done a really good job in the last few weeks where he's dealing with a pretty bad left knee injury. I think he has a bone bruise and then he got hit again. But he is, I think, purposely speeding up his process a bit in a good way. Usually that's not always a good thing. But to me right now, it's a good thing because he knows that he's not going to be able to extend the play the same way as a rusher. So, hitting those little slide RPOs, let's get the ball out to some of those running backs a little bit quicker. And then the Eagles are getting more diverse in the run game. I think they did a few things to try and counter how attacking Dallas's front is, which to me, that's encouraging going forward for the Eagles because they have just like just a crazy schedule going forward. So what do you think on Eagles offense versus Cowboys defense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really like a lot of the things that you said there. And like, it just goes back to this Eagles offense just having answers for so many things that are thrown at them. Like you mentioned with Micah Parsons lining up over the weak link of their offensive line, like they were able to find answers for that, especially that first drive out of the second half where you have that Jalen Hurts to Devontae Smith touchdown, which was awesome. And then the usage of Dallas Goedert in this game was really impressive. Like, I think it's going to hurt a little bit that he's injured for at least the next 4 weeks with the forearm, but using him in this game to kind of match up against the different Cowboys linebackers and using him down the sideline when you were running different concepts out of that, I thought was really good. And like 90th percentile EPA per play performance, 74th percentile success rate performance against a really good Cowboys defense. Jalen Hurts, 17.3 total EPA. After not looking like himself the first couple weeks of the season, he's again entered this elite level play, which has been really nice to see. And as he's displayed that, and then like going back to the injury, like the Eagles were playing 12 personnel 15.3% of the time. They're playing 11 personnel 71% of the time. So it's going to be also interesting to see how they can go back to like some of the stuff that they were doing without their tight end. But that's what I'm most curious to see. But they have the bye week to figure that out here as they go through that. And like, I think like good thing for them is they're a little bit better out of 11 personnel than 12 personnel. So maybe they do less 2 tight end sets and rely more on their receivers because AJ Brown and Devontae Smith are obviously very, very good at what they do. So I can see a lot more passing out of 11 personnel as they start to move forward here without Goedert.
Yeah, Goedert has been not always lighting it up from a reception perspective, but he is a really, really good run blocker. I think he has an attitude in the run game. Like if you ever see clips on the Eagles Twitter, it's like always Dallas Goedert celebrating a big run. So I know they're going to miss that over the next, whatever it is, 4 weeks or 5 weeks. I do think, if they're spreading it out to run the ball a little bit more, kind of, we talked about how the Ravens are doing that a lot. Hurts, like he's not the same threat in the run game, which of course you wouldn't be if your knee is injured that bad. And defenses are understanding that. So the Eagles usually have such an advantage in the run game because you have to account for Hurts in some sort of way, where now teams are not having to do that in the same way. But I don't know, maybe they use AJ Brown in the slot a bunch against the Cowboys. I would expect that to kind of, maybe they keep doing that because they don't have Goedert to use in the same way. And just one random thing, I think they went for it. It was a 4th and 1. So on their like own 30-yard line on the first drive. So that was awesome. And then they used that push sneak, but this time they use like a really elongated snap count. So it's such a timing play. Usually they'll get up to the ball super fast and like it's on a quick count. But this one was cool because one, you get the positive of maybe drawing the other team off sides. But now as a defender, you're like squeezing your hands so hard. Like this is the worst play as a defender to have to deal with. Like Jason Kelsey, all these guys just kind of falling over you and pushing you hard. And for them to make that just like a defender have to wait there for like 15 full seconds, constantly hear the snap count. So that was just like another kind of small tweak I saw for the Eagles to do that. And just high level quarterbacking, I think, for Jalen Hurts all around. Can't wait for the second matchup, particularly Cowboys offense versus Eagles defense. Both of us love Shawn Desai overall, what he's been doing. And despite CeeDee Lamb almost having 200 yards, I actually thought this was a really good game plan for Shawn Desai, and the planning aspect of it. To me, on the first film review, it wasn't a problem for the Eagles. They've gone through so many players on the back end. Last week, they ended up with a lot of kind of outside leverage man coverage in the slot, where the nickel cornerback, that player's help is a little bit too far away sometimes to make a difference. In this game, they leaned on cover 3, really for the first time, I think, all season that they played it at that clip. And now your nickel defender can play outside leverage, but can funnel that player to a linebacker. So they played cover 3 to trip sets where the backside safety is now able to take the vertical. And again, I understand, CeeDee Lamb had a ton of catches. Some of those were off busted coverages. Some of that was a little bit in scramble drill. Some of that were just in tight one-on-one situations. I do think that the Cowboys did a good job of dialing up beaters for those different coverages because, Philly tried everything. They doubled him, one Roberts him, played cover 2 to his side, clouded him. I thought Dak played excellent out of structure, just literally inches away from 8 more points. I know this is a game we talked about a bunch. How'd you feel about Cowboys offense versus Eagles defense?
Yeah, I mean, I again, I like a lot of the points that you brought up there. And if you're a Cowboys fan, someone who is rooting for the Cowboys this year or anything along those lines, I think you should feel better about the Cowboys coming out of this game, because Dak Prescott was great in this game. 17.4 total EPA, 74th percentile EPA per pass. And this is again without the Cowboys being able to run the ball. And they kind of just didn't want to run the ball that much in this game. The Eagles have had this theme this year where, because of the way that their defense has been set up, really strong defensive line, a lot of injuries in the secondary, teams have a 6.4% pass rate over expected against them, which is the highest mark of any defense that has faced opposing offenses in the league so far. And Cowboys were the same way in this game, 8.7% pass rate over expected, put the whole game on Dak Prescott. And it worked for a large majority of the game, especially with CeeDee Lamb. I think Jake Ferguson coming alive here has been really promising for the Cowboys, because Michael Gallup targets are just not working out in general. So the more that they target Jake Ferguson, and even when they have to go to their more gadget type receivers with Jalen Tolbert and different players like that, Kamonte Turpin, it's probably better than Michael Gallup at this point with how he's playing. And as long as you can just keep feeding CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and know what you're having with Dak and the couple scrambles that he had early in the game, I think that is really exciting for this Cowboys offense. And that's why I'm so pumped about this rematch that we're going to have in a couple weeks here, because this was a great Dak Prescott game against a good Eagles defense. And I think that's what I am banking on going forward for this Cowboys offense, is more performances like that from him.
Yeah, in the rematch, there's a chance that the Cowboys, that their records are much closer to the Eagles, because the Eagles have a really, really tough stretch of games coming up now. The Cowboys maybe a little bit lighter in the next few games. And then the Eagles end off the season with, I think it's Giants, Cardinals, Giants, where the Cowboys have a few tougher opponents there. And, the Eagles defense, obviously watched all year. I think always pass against the Eagles defense is what you should do, because of how just crazy, crazy good that front is. And usually front and coverage, there's such a marriage there, because you don't have to cover for as long when your front is able to cause pressure. And the things that you ask your defensive backs to do are going to be different. And then it changes how they play, because a lot of times the Eagles defensive backs are anticipating, hey, the ball's going to be out in 2 seconds. I can play the first break of a route, and it's going to be a sack if that doesn't happen. But the Cowboys offensive line, kind of outside that right tackle spot in this game, did a really, really good job. Just a lot of clips of them kind of trapping the defense, especially the defensive end on the left side. They're pull their arms down, and you see it looks like the defensive end is kind of falling over themselves. Just a real testament, I think, to the Cowboys offensive line in that one. So I think longer term, the Eagles defense, it's so much about what you have to do and not what you want to do. On the opposite side, right, the Cowboys defense can play tons of man coverage. They have that crazy attacking front, and a lot of that is based in Bland for the Cowboys is playing awesome at cornerback. Even that touchdown to Devontae Smith was such a sick ball in a specific spot where, just throw your hands up. If there are better offense will beat better defense. I think that's kind of understood across everything, and just unfortunate situation. But I cannot wait for that rematch. It's obviously going to be in Texas too. So maybe just more for the Cowboys. And I think Mike McCarthy on offense, they did do a few things where I was like, okay, this is clearly a staff that is like leaning into some more of the motion aspects of it. Like you talk about, I think it was Ferguson on kind of a stick nod where they start in 3 tight ends to one side and motion one out. So, everyone's watching Dolphins film. They're taking a little bit of it. And, obviously Adam Vanderhaar's got the Cowboys in our season long pool. We don't need to spoil too much about that, but I think that they have a legitimate chance to win the division still, which, as you said, as a Cowboys fan is, it's hard to come off like a loss to a division opponent on like what is such clearly a big rivalry game and feel great about it. But yeah, I think that I expect Dak to continue to play well. And I mean, Tish, get us the rematch right now, if you ask me.
Yeah, I know. I do need that rematch. And I want to mention one thing with the end of game sequence. And I think I texted you about this, but not 100% sure. So, Cowboys, because of different penalties and both Slay and Bradbury going down on the final drive, which I'm glad that they're okay. Like that was a scary situation for a second there for the Eagles defense. Like ended up getting into the area where they had a chance to win the game. ESPN's win probability model had the Cowboys at like slightly above 50% chance at one point on that final drive to win the game because they were very close to scoring there. The QB draw call that ended up getting called for a false start. I think Dallas is so lucky that there was a false start called on that because that play was going to get sworn pretty easily, probably even for a loss. And then the time would have been running because they had no timeouts. Good thing that didn't end up coming back to bite Dallas. The sack ended up coming back to bite Dallas, which was a very quick pressure. That was pretty difficult to avoid there. But like, I'm glad that didn't end like that because it would have been very reminiscent to like the 49ers playoff game endings or different things like that. And I mean, this did feel like a playoff game. Like it was very intense back and forth the whole time. But I mean, like, did you see that also? Like they were about to run QB draw there.
I did, yeah. It seems like the Cowboys just love quarterback draw in those kind of situations. I will say, so on that play, I think the Eagles had like a TE stunt where it ended up being like the perfect defensive call. I think if they didn't have that stunt on, I think Dak may have walked in. And football, it stinks sometimes because it's so results based. Whether like if that quarterback draw goes for 11 yards, I know that you would probably stick to it and say, like even though that worked out, it's still a bad process, which I think is probably the better way to look at it. But yeah, I mean, they're really lucky. Yeah. And this is actually the first game. So there was the quarterback draw that Dak had, or quarterback sneak Dak had earlier in the game that converted. And then it was like Bayard had a penalty after it. And then Sirianni threw a challenge flag. I think Sirianni, like he is so good at understanding they have a, advantage on the offensive line. Let's go for it. Run that push sneak. And he is like, I think in Eric's model, just always coming out close to the top because he usually pushes the right buttons. That was the first time all year where I was like, okay, if we could give Nick Sirianni the truth serum, I think he would say, yeah, that was a bad challenge. Like the quarterback sneak is like spots it's just not something that gets overturned. So I mean, Sirianni usually great. We love him around here because I think he's great at what he does. But I was like, I don't know, maybe it's that Philly Dallas game just turning things weird for people a little bit, and we get another one. So we're lucky. But another player that hopefully we get a ton more of. Let's close up as we get close to an hour. CJ Stroud, he was a picture on your weekend review article. I think he really earned it. When I was watching film yesterday, I was going through and I was like kind of in a slog. And I was like, okay, let me turn on the CJ Stroud film. Can't wait to see what I see. And actually, it was really not funny, but like the first half film was kind of bad. He was missing open receivers. I'm sure if you asked him whether it's footwork or something like that, he just like wasn't hitting a bunch of open players. They were like, I think he ended up with like 470. He could have had like 550 yards easy. I think over time, I'm sure we'll see him hit those throws. But once the second half started, almost like immediately, I think it was Noah Brown on that big play. He just hits throw over and over. And I think so he can hit different throws, whether it's like finding different ways to make simple plays like boot work, where he's hitting the kind of target route, but then he does a good job getting his head around quick and then like hitting that second delay route where the Falcons would just like eat on that. I think it was in 2016 during that big year. And then you see him hit that big dagger going across the field or that double move touchdown. Like that one was special where it gets dropped in a bucket. And I don't even know if his base is like fully set. That final touchdown is in a crazy pinpoint. Even in like early on in the year, I think we made sure to talk about them early because I think we felt comfortable that Stroud is going to continue to improve. The way he drives those kind of out-breaking throws is not something you see, I think, from a ton of young quarterbacks. And I think that is a great way that he has the anticipation and then the arm strength to make good on that anticipation, where he is throwing early, but also with such a velocity and getting to those spots. Like, I think it may have been on the last drive where it's like a whole throw to cover two, like that late in the game where the defense is comfortable. They know what's probably going to happen on the offense. You want to attack the sidelines, and to be able to attack that, for my eyes, he is just processing at such a high level. So I know you really want to talk about CJ Stroud. What'd you have on him on that historic performance?
Yeah, I agree. The processing is awesome. There's a certain test out there that said he wasn't going to be that good at that. So I'm glad that he's really overcoming that test. But I mean, fourth in EPA per play this season among 36 qualifying quarterbacks. Like, to do that as a non-rookie is very impressive. You'd be talked about in all these discussions. To do it as a rookie in a new offense that you're just learning is like super, super impressive. From CJ Stroud's perspective, from Bobby Slowick's perspective, and like, the most impressive thing about the Texans and like their passing game production is they don't really have that true alpha wide receiver one, like the AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb types that we just talked about. It's just a bunch of good wide receivers, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Noah Brown, Dalton Schultz. Like, these are fine receiving options. It would be crazy if they ended up with like an alpha wide receiver one this offseason. But again, like, if you're getting this pass production, I don't know if you necessarily need to pour a ton of resources there. And this was the 11th best performance in terms of total EPA on the season so far. CJ Stroud's performance in week 9, they really just let him cook like we were asking to. They had a below average neutral pass rate coming into this game, and basically every game this season. They really just turned up the notch there. 61% neutral pass rate on the week. And like, it was just, they've kind of given up on the run game, which, even though I like Dameon Pierce coming into this year, I kind of like what he does in general. Like, it just hasn't been working this year. And when you have Laremy Tunsil, who's awesome pass blocker, and you have CJ Stroud and these receiving options, and Bobby Slowick scheming up a really good passing game, like, all of these things combined has made CJ Stroud's performances this year really special. And like, that game-winning drive will be a big turning point, I think, in Houston, as they've kind of gone through this really tough phase of the last couple seasons, and coming out of it with what they have right now is, again, like, something that they should be super pumped by.
Yeah, I agree that, like, if you're a Texans fan, a lot of long years and some just crazy things going on there. But yeah, DeMeco Ryans, I'm such a believer in him. Particularly, you were talking about abandoning the running game. They're not abandoning the running game. They have running backs kicking field goals. That's what they're doing instead. I'm like, seeing the little clip of he's like trying so hard to kind of hold back a smile, but obviously he lets it out. Like, such a cool moment. And against the Falcons this year, I think we talked about it a little bit, but they run like an in route and like an underneath route. I wrote about it a little bit, I think, last week. And it's just like a fake in cut and then go with Dalton Schultz. And that was like very clearly CJ Stroud. He did it himself, or like they did it together on the sidelines. Everyone talked about it in the post game. It's like they didn't win that game, which was a bummer because we would have talked about it until the end of time. But yeah, just like seeing the results there so early, because their whole season, really, I think they want to see like, okay, well, who are the talented players on this roster? Obviously, in like a big rebuilding phase, they're like creeping kind of close to that early Lions phase where it's like no one doesn't like the Texans. Like, everyone loves rooting for them because they're so easy to root for. And to see, of course, production and stats, we love that. I know you love that. But from just like that film view, when you're constantly seeing like the fundamentals there of a quarterback that is, I think, hopefully just continues on an upward trajectory. And of course, development is not always linear for everyone. So, I mean, but seeing him this early, able to make those plays, especially as you said, with a receiving core who, yeah, they don't have, for example, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith there like the Eagles do. So but still a situation that I would call like a really good situation, maybe the best situation of especially those rookie quarterbacks, where obviously hope Anthony Richardson gets healthy. Bryce Young, I think, unfortunately, the Panthers roster has a lot to keep on improving on. But I mean, CJ Stroud, like at this point, I imagine is the favorite to win Rookie of the Year. And as long as he continues that production, my assumption is he would get that. But then next week he goes to Cincinnati for a game against our good friend Lou Anarumo and the Bengals. So what a gift after a historic performance to go into the Anarumo blender. And then next week we got San Francisco at Jacksonville. I'm assuming that we'll probably talk about that. And then we get Browns Ravens, which that'll be great. I think in the first matchup, right, the Browns didn't have their quarterback, but Browns defense playing awesome. I hope CJ Stroud plays super well against the Bengals. I think that'd be a fun one, but I'm just gonna be tough against Lou, right?
Yeah, no, I mean it will be, but from the opening line to now, I think it's moved in the Texans' direction, if I remember right. So I think that's promising for the Texans in this game, and I am excited for that matchup. Lots of good football next week, for sure. Outside of the primetime games, which I'll still watch, and I know you'll probably still watch because we love it, and we would be wishing for these games in May. Like I think that there's going to be so much good football. I have two fun facts on CJ Stroud before we wrap up here. That don't really mean much in the grand scheme of things, but are kind of funny. So CJ Stroud in this game finished with an undefined yards per carry because of the triple option, where he ended up getting a pitch back halfway through the play that went for 10 yards. So he got the rushing yards on that play, but he ended up with 0 carries on the day. So 10 divided by 0, you put that into a calculator when you're younger, it gives you undefined, divide by 0 error. So that was pretty funny. I'm sure it won't break anything in any of the code that we have here at Sumer as an undefined yards per carry. And then he's also the first quarterback since at least 1970, which is what Pro Football Reference goes back to, with just 1 interception through his first 8 career starts. So I think that's very impressive. Even though interceptions are more fluky than other stats, like 1 interception in your first 8 career starts, first quarterback since 1970 to do that is really cool to see.
I just love the fun facts. I'll allow the word fun to be used subjectively. I'm glad that, at least you found that. I remember I had a math teacher who was like, dividing by 0 is the worst thing you could possibly do. Like your day is going to be ruined if you divide by 0. So I don't know, maybe I'll call them up and say, hey, look, we divided by 0. It was actually pretty fun. Like that play, it was so funny. Like how I would be extremely surprised if that was design. I feel more comfortable saying there's no chance that was the design of the play, but for a running back, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I'll watch it back and convince myself that that's exactly what they wanted to have happen. But whatever, the design, the wherewithal to pitch it back is fun. So we started off, we talked about early with the Chiefs defense pitching it, the Texans offense leading into it, just fun things. So yeah, fun facts. We'll see.
It's always those
we'll break other ones.
Yeah, I'll look for more next week, but like it's always those like no yes plays where it's like, oh, I don't know where this is going, and then it turns out okay, like Rutgers ran the fumble Ruski against Ohio State, where like in slow motion, you're like, oh my God, what are they doing here? And then it goes for like a 40-yard gain or something. Like it's always those types of plays that are fun to watch when they actually turn out well. Yeah.
That one was, that was awesome to see. That was like the primal, like, absolutely not, no way. Yes, this is exactly what have happened. So that was a great one. And we appreciate everyone listening to another episode of Stats and Scheme. Keep the feedback coming. Tell us what you like, what you didn't like. If you thought Tej's facts were fun, if you thought they were kind of like middling, that's on the people to decide. They were fun to me, Tej. I do appreciate you doing that. But everyone, be sure to listen to Eric and Thomas on Mondays and Wednesdays. Visit our website, sumersports.com. A lot of fun team tables, player tables. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.